Today, we're going to talk about how to move away from coding tutorials and into custom-built projects. Learning to code can be stressful and hard, and that's why I was proud to write the book, Breaking the Code, that gives you those 5 essential steps to landing that first software job. Pick up your copy today at Amazon or any other major outlet. I get asked a question a lot, and the question is, how do I move from a tutorial into a custom-built application? And I think a lot of people out on the internet and Twitter and YouTube have good intentions, but it's really hard to describe what we as professional developers sometimes go through in our thought process when we take an idea from the whiteboard or an idea from a customer and we turn that into a working piece of software. And so a lot of the advice that we give is, hey, once you get to a tutorial, build a custom project right away. And when I see a lot of people even questioning this process, I realize that the methods that I go through aren't well known or even well put out there. So that I thought I would give you my 4 steps method for turning an idea into a custom piece of software. Given my almost 30 years of software development experience, I've seen a lot of consulting projects. And sometimes projects fail because teams or team members or programmers fail to ask a fundamental question. And the question is this: what is the app supposed to do? Now, whether you're building this app for yourself, say put on your portfolio, or for others, you must understand what the app is supposed to do in order for you to write software or build screens to make a functional app. I've seen a lot of teams go off and start building code or writing code or building things before they even understand what the app's supposed to do. And when they deliver that, it either doesn't work or it doesn't line up with the customer's expectations. Now, when you're moving from, say, tutorials into your first custom-built project, this is critical so that you can build the app. I see a lot of people confused out there because they think they can't build a custom application, but they've never asked themselves, what is it supposed to do? And start there. For example, let's take this to concrete. Let's say that we were tasked with building a mortgage loan calculator. You need to ask yourself the question, what is that app supposed to do? And you can boil that down into a couple of statements. For example, you could say, given an interest rate, a loan amount, and a term, I want you to print out the monthly payment and all of the monthly payments until the loan is paid off. And so that tells us right away what the app's supposed to do, the function, and also the output as well when we talk about printing out the monthly payments. And so now we can move on to step 2, which is wireframe. So now that we know what we're going to do or what the app is supposed to do, let's talk about like what it should look like. One of the steps I go to is I start kind of what we call wireframing. Now, wireframing isn't like a full-blown HTML app, though it could be. I start way simpler than that. And a lot of times I start with paper or a whiteboard where I'm just like sketching out my ideas, what I want the app to look like. Well, let's say that this is your first custom app and you don't really have a lot of experience building UIs. What you can do is you can start Googling other applications that either do the same thing or something very similar to what you're doing to gather your inspiration so that you can say, oh, that's a cool layout. I see how that's laid out. Now, once I get past the paper and pen phase or the whiteboard phase, a lot of times I'll use a wireframing application like Balsamiq. Now, Balsamiq allows me real quickly to build out a prototype or a mock-up of the application itself. And I've got one here that I want to show you for our loan application. Now, you can see here on the left of my wireframe, I have 3 input fields. I have an amount, I have a term that's described in months. And then I also have an interest rate that's written there as 5%. And then a calculate button. And then on the right-hand side there, you see my monthly payment is displayed, my total interest, my total principal, and the total everything principal plus interest that I'm paying for the life of the loan. And then underneath it, this is what they call an amortization schedule, which simply means I'm printing out the payment history for the entire lifetime of the loan. And now, if you pay attention to this wireframe, you can see that we've described a couple of things that are real important. Number one, the inputs that go into the application itself. And that's on the left-hand side where I have my calculate button, but I'm taking in an input of loan amount, term that's described in months, and an interest rate. And then on the right-hand side and underneath, you can see my outputs where I'm displaying my monthly payment and my amortization schedule below in a grid. And that describes in detail what this app is supposed to do. Hey, if you're liking this video, please remember to subscribe, hit the like button, and hit the little bell to get notified of all of our future great content. So step 3 is what I call the pseudocode phase. Now, if you're writing a really large application, obviously we're not going to pseudocode the entire application in one sitting. But for this, our mortgage loan app, it's pretty small, it's pretty compact, so we can pseudocode this in its entirety. Now, if we look at our UI, because now we have a UI prototype that has a calculate button. The first step that needs to happen here is that the user needs to input those 3 fields, and then we click the calculate button. Now, from there, we know that if we're using JavaScript or any kind of language, that button has to call something. So our first step is to write our first method, which could be calculate mortgage or calculate payment. And so now we can pseudocode that I now have a function that's going to be called. We can call that a driver function. We can call it our main function, our entryway into the application itself. And so once we're inside that, now we can think through what are the things that need to happen. Well, if I look at the right-hand side there, I know that I need to calculate a payment. So that's going to involve some kind of mathematical calculation to calculate a payment for a loan. And this is called the present value of money or mortgage loan calculation. Well, let's say you don't know how to do that. Well, you can Google that up and go see, okay, how do you calculate payments for a loan given these 3 parameters, which is interest, term, and loan amount. And that should be something that you may have to research if you don't know what you have to do. Now, this is what I want you to understand. Everything that you need to build, you may not know how to do, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't start building your application. You can research it, you can Google it, you can look into the types of things that you need to learn or know about in order to complete your application. And I promise you, and I want to give you a lot of hope here, is that a lot of times when we start building things, even with 20 plus years of experience, we don't know everything that we need to do to build this app. There may be gaps in our knowledge that we need to either re-educate ourselves on or even learn something completely new, like how do I calculate a mortgage loan payment? But all of these things can be found from your customer or through research through Google. They should be able to tell you those things. Now, once we know that we need to calculate a payment, we also need to look down through there and say, okay, I need to list out all of my payments. And we know that we need a payment for each month for the life of the loan. So if we have a 60-month payment or a 5-year loan, that means that grid's going to consist of 60 rows of payments. And what we need to do is calculate all of those payments for every month in the loan term. And that implies that we need some type of loop mechanism that we can loop over a function that calculates the payment based on the current balance. And I think if you go through that, now you can see we take an input, we calculate the main payment, then we run a loop basically from 0 month to the last month, which would be 60. And inside that loop, we're going to calculate the payment every time based on the current balance. Another thing that would happen inside that is we're also going to subtract the payments made to reduce the balance for every consecutive month. I would write all of this down in a pseudocode, in plain Word. This could be in Notepad. It could be right in your code IDE, which I do a lot using comments. Sometimes I will comment my entire function with pseudocode and then fill in those comments as I go back and start coding. So let's move on to step 4, which is the actual coding process. Now, our final step is actually start coding. Now, a lot of people make the mistake and put this as step 1. They start coding right away, but you didn't do that. You asked a question, and then you also made a UI, you pseudocoded some things, and now what you can do is take that pseudocode, and what I like to do if I'm just pseudocoding a function is put those as comments in the code, and I'll start at the top, and I'll start filling in the actual JavaScript or C# code that needs to take place in order to fulfill the functionality that I've described in my pseudocode and in my UI. Now, what you may run into is a lot of times, the assumptions you made on your UI may be wrong as you get into it, as you really start diving into the details. Or maybe your pseudocode, you misunderstood something about your pseudocode, and that's okay. What I want you to do now is refactor those things as you go and keep refining the process. And then the things that you don't know how to from a technical level, let's say you don't know how to write a loop in JavaScript. Well, now you can go research that loop, take a tutorial on how to build a loop, and then bring that into your software as you're building out those payments, because now you know what you're trying to do, what you're trying to build, and that makes it real easy to research the topics that you don't understand or fill in the gaps in your knowledge. Or maybe you don't understand something completely and you're doing a freelance project, and those are questions that you would bring back to your customer and say, hey, I don't really understand about this payment or not. One of the mistakes we make early on as developers is we refuse to ask questions to our team lead, or sometimes we don't ask questions to the customer. We'll just sit there and struggle and struggle and struggle, and we never get anywhere because we don't ask questions. You also, if you're doing this for yourself, you can ask a teacher or a coach or a mentor to say, hey, I've gotten this far. This is what I'm trying to do. Can you give me a hint or give me some help? So don't be afraid to ask questions, but follow that pseudocode until you get all the way to the end. And when you look back, you'll have a completed working project. I hope this helps. Good luck and keep coding.